Welcome to the Jewish Newspaper Review. This is a pilot video, and I can't thank enough our two special panellists. We've got Maxine Elias.
Hello.
Good afternoon. And we've got Stephen Hoffman. Maxine, this is a little opportunity. Maxine is a very successful business person, and she also was candidate for Jewish Mum of the Year 2013. And Stephen represents the Zionist Federation. So just briefly, Stephen, can you just give us, in a sentence, the mission of the Zionist Federation?
It's to speak up for Israel in the UK.
Fantastic. And Maxine, you've got an event coming up in June.
Yeah, I'm volunteering, doing an event for Camp Simcha and Jewish Child's Day. It's called Party at the Palace. It's at Alexandra Palace, basically to raise the profile of the charities and to make sure that the community all has great time and hopefully comes back next year and hopefully helps the charities.
Thanks, Maxine. We've got three papers in front of us. We've got the Jewish Tribune, the Jewish Chronicle and the Jewish News, and they're from the 25th and the 26th of April. And Stephen, can we start off with you? You've got a story that we're going to talk about from the Jewish Chronicle.
Yes, I read a very interesting article by Jennifer Lippman on Gaza. It's about this brilliant TV programme last week on Channel 4, and it's about how actually in a lot of areas of Gaza it's actually boom time for the rich, and how if you're connected with Hamas or the government employees, there's a way of making lots of money in Gaza, and it changes sort of the perception of Gaza just being all about, you know, bombs and bullets and rockets and terrorism.
And also, Stephen, people think that also people live in extreme poverty in Gaza, and they're an oppressed people.
I mean, what's quite interesting about the film is they said there was actually a growing gap between the rich and poor, but that's not to do with Israel, it's to do with how Hamas has kind of allocated the resources.
What was the viewing on this? Sorry, do you know what the viewing was for this
I
programme?
don't know what the viewing was specifically for the programme, but having seen it myself, what was interesting, it came from a guy who described himself previously as quite a left-wing sort of anti-Israel student, and then he went to Gaza and it totally changed his perception, because it wasn't what you're told in the news by, say, papers like The Guardian or BBC News. It totally turned it on its head.
And why were you watching the programme? What was your draw for the programme?
It just sounded quite an interesting programme, and I've always been interested to look at other perspectives, and it also showed me another side, because we often hear Gaza is all about, you know, terrorism, etc., and it showed there's another side. It shows that actually maybe in the future there is some hope.
Okay.
Do you think, Stephen, the story was covered by the mainstream media? Do you think the mainstream media would cover this?
So they mentioned it in briefly, but it was almost like an aside. It wasn't, say, you know, a one-page article, because it just doesn't go with the whole narrative. So unfortunately, I think we still have a long way to go with the mainstream media, because it's all about challenging perceptions.
Maxine, you've got the Jewish News in front of you.
Yeah. What really appealed to me was you don't have to be a Jew to be Jewish. Personally, initially when I actually looked at it, I just flicked past it and I thought, what on earth, I can't be bothered, let's get to the gossip. But I would have liked to have a little apostrophe here. You don't have to be a Jew to be Jewish, with a little bit of a chaim, because this is a book that Amos Oz has done with his daughter, and it's really about the fact that Jews are, there's so many different types of descriptions of Jews, and for me, Jews are, well, for the book maybe even, he's saying it's not necessarily about the religion, it's not about the spirituality, it's just about the words, and that most Jewish families, it will be even just once a year on Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, but most Jewish families at some point will have some sort of historical debate, discussion, communication about Judaism through the past. And that's basically, for me, what this book called Jews and Words is actually about. It's about the fact that it's not about the spirituality. It's not about going to shul every week. It's not about eating kosher. It's not about wearing a kippah on your head with long skirts. It's actually about the fact that through the generations, our communication and our text continues. And whether people interpret it their own way, that's fine. But, the stories of Abraham are still the stories of Abraham and will still continue to be, in hundreds of years' time.
It's interesting, Maxine, because we've got Stephen from the Zionist Federation. Israel describes itself as a Jewish homeland, and it'll be interesting to perhaps, if there's a relationship, you don't have to be a Jew to be Jewish, comparing the secular values perhaps of Israeli society, but also wanting to describe themselves as a Jewish state. Stephen?
I mean, I think a lot of it's also about how you define a Jewish state, because is it a state of Jewish people, or is it sort of a religious context? And I think for a lot of Israelis, they're very proud of their Jewish culture, but that's not necessarily the same as being religious. I know that's true certainly for my family. They're very proud to be Jewish, but it's more like a cultural Judaism, a historical Judaism.
Yes.
It doesn't mean they go to synagogue every day or week.
And Maxine, do you think that's what Amos Oz was trying to put
Certainly,
forward?
I mean, his background is that he's an Israeli, and his family, albeit actually his mother died when he was young, not very nice circumstances, but he was actually an Israeli who went to a religious school because the other option was to actually go to a sort of a Labour sort of motivated political school, and his family were sort of again not trying to do that. So he went to a religious school but wasn't religious, and then went to a kibbutz and was brought up with a kibbutz family who so he's a person of Israel but a person of the land.
What do you think of this story, Stephen? You don't have to be a Jew to be Jewish.
I think it's quite an important thing, because something I was always brought up on was sort of the whole idea of Judaism as a culture, as a race. It meant that you didn't have to specifically go to synagogue every day, etc.
Yes.
And I think that's what it's getting at. And also what's interesting is that Amos Oz, his sort of history is like a microcosm of Israeli society. I mean, he's been to religious school, he's also been to kibbutz, he's seen sort of the religious and the secular nature of Israel. He's experienced it all, and then through it he's kind of seen how he feels Jewish. And I think what's good about it is like everyone's relation to Judaism within the Jewish faith is slightly different, because it's all about sort of, because Judaism values the individual. And I think this is what this story gets at.
100%.
No, very good. I've got the Jewish Tribune, and on page 18 they've got an article, exhibition celebrates righteous Muslims. Recently the Board of Deputies hosted an event called the Righteous Muslims, and the objective was to showcase what the Muslims, how the Muslim community saved Jewish lives during the Holocaust. And the mission is to educate not only their own community, because there are Muslims that are Holocaust deniers, extreme, but also to educate the Jewish community as well, because I wasn't really aware that there were righteous Muslims that sacrificed their lives to save Jewish lives. And I think these stories can only help to try and develop and nurture the relationships between the Jewish and Muslim communities. Stephen?
I agree. I mean, I'm a firm believer in stronger ties between Judaism and Islam. And in fact, the Zionist Federation actually has an event on May the 7th where we've got Sheikh Abdul Palisi speaking about Jerusalem. And he's involved in an organisation called the Muslim Israel Fellowship. And it shows actually how there's actually a lot of Muslims who want a stronger relationship with Judaism. And going back to the Holocaust, there were sort of a lot of righteous Muslims. I mean, also the King of Morocco was very involved. And I think it's important to see these stories, because we can have sort of a very negative perception of Islam. But I think people sometimes get confused between Islamic extremism and Islam in general. And I think stories like this, especially from a religious newspaper, help challenge these notions.
Yes,
Absolutely.
Maxine.
I mean, it's funny you say about the King of Morocco, but I've actually been to Morocco and Turkey, and most of the Jewish people that I know would say, "Well, why are you going to those countries?" And both of them have got synagogues. Both of them treated us so. I mean, it wasn't even an issue. I mean, people were saying to me, "You should change your passport. You should change your stuff." I mean, but it was actually incredible to go back to these countries that, like you said, I mean, I didn't know about the righteous Muslims, but, to actually open out the wider community's minds.
Do you think, Maxine, it's important for Jewish schools to be educated about these righteous Muslims? Because it's there's so many lessons to learn about this.
I would say not only Jewish schools. I mean, personally, the Jewish curriculum is full to the brim. However, but I do think that potentially in all schools that we should know a little bit more about righteous Muslims, because I think you have people that are now starting to bring into the curriculum the Holocaust, and something like this covers both sides of it.
What do you think, Stephen? The Jewish children should be taught about the righteous Muslims because it can only do good for both communities.
I mean, I think it's a positive thing. I think, obviously, we have to be careful because the curriculum is extremely full. But maybe there's a way, through, Hader classes or somewhere like that.
Right.
And I also think it's important not just for Jewish schools. I think this is something which, could maybe become part of, religious education or something like that. Just so you learn something more about it. So, I mean, when I learned about Islam at school, like that was never brought up, for instance.
It was never brought up about the righteous Muslims?
No, it was never brought up. And I didn't go to a Jewish school, but it was never even mentioned.
Absolutely.
And were you aware,
No, this
Maxine?
is the first time. I mean, I don't read the Jewish Tribune, but this is the first time that I've actually even heard that terminology.
Right. And so on May the 6th...
May the 7th.
May the 7th, Stephen, can you just repeat this?
We've got an event to celebrate the 47th anniversary of Jerusalem.
Oh, it's Yom Yerushalayim.
Yes, and we've got Sheikh Abdul Palasi, who's come all the way from Rome, Italy, to speak on it. He's speaking about how Islam respects Judaism's claim to Jerusalem, and how Jews and Muslims can work together. And he's an inspirational speaker. He's from a Sufi Muslim background, and it just shows the sort of person he is, that he's come all the way from Rome just for this event.
Can I ask, what support does he get from the Islamic community to...
That's a good question, Maxine.
Well, it's quite an interesting one because he's the General Secretary of the Islamic Council in Italy. So maybe it's slightly different in Italy to what it's like in the UK. Because I know, for instance, my friend who's a Muslim, he speaks out a lot against Islamic extremism. And unfortunately, he doesn't get a lot of support from organisations like the Muslim Council of Britain in the UK. But I think Italy's slightly different. I think there's more support from moderate Muslims. And it's a lesson we could learn from.
Absolutely.